So today, everybody, we're going to be reacting to a debate that Dennis Prager recently had with Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. Now, this Young Turks network is a network that many people on YouTube, especially on the right, like to attack and critique, and it's well deserved. The Young Turks really is a smear organization that has absolutely no business having as many followers or as much popularity as it does if we had a society and we had a media era in which rationality and truth was valued. Now, since clickbait and sensationalism is what is valued more than rationality and truth, bad actors like the Young Turks can become popular. And so, just for people to understand, before Dennis Prager had even came on the show and before the debate was even posted, the Young Turks had already made a series of videos personally slandering him and attacking him. I'll read some of their titles off right now. One of them is Dennis Prager. There were many nice slave owners in the South, which is a Young Turks commentary on him. Another is Dennis Prager triggered by fifth grader. Another is Dennis Prager, women are ruining America with their emotions. Video after video after video slandering Mr. Prager and his opinions, because this is precisely what the Young Turks does. And what we do here on this channel is we try to reach a more pensive and thoughtful conclusion in our politics. So what I will be doing, I will be interacting to segments of the debate between Prager and Kasparian and segments of the debate between Uygur, Kasparian, and Prager. I will not watch the entire debate. I would encourage all of you to go over there and watch the entire debate so you can see for yourself without my commentary. As always, the debate will be below in the comment section and in the description down below if you want to go ahead and see it for yourself. Now, let us begin.
Joining us now is Dennis Prager, the man you just saw in that video. And Dennis, I guess you could call TYT acetaminophen because we don't want you to ache. We want to make sure we give you an opportunity to feel good by debating someone on the left.
Funny, I was thinking, if only you were a New York Times columnist, how much money you'd be making now.
Well, I'm a little more honest than a New York Times columnist, so this will be a great conversation. Thank you for doing it.
They're a little bit more honest than a New York Times columnist. Before I even begin, my friends, we have to understand something, okay? The Young Turks and the New York Times, the only thing that distinguishes those two entities is the amount of time that one of them had been around and the level of institutional gravitas the other has. The New York Times is an established medium which is considered to be a paper of record in America, but the New York Times, regardless of how long it's been around and regardless of its reputation, has been known to distort, defame, and support certain things that have taken America down a very long path. They have a long history of supporting certain kinds of wars. They supported Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. The Young Turks is a new media organization, but they also have a tendency to slander, attack, defame, and exaggerate things to get their point across. You don't believe me? Look, there is a show on the Young Turks that I personally went on called Indisputable with Rashad Richey. And on that show, almost every single day, Rashad Richey is talking about using isolated instances of police brutality to draw up a bigger narrative of police being inherently racist and oppressive to black people. That's what he does almost every single day on his show. There's nothing wrong with highlighting it's police brutality, none whatsoever. I am personally someone who believes that we need to have accountable government, we need to have good government, we need to have moral government, and so I want all government, including police, to be accountable. But I do have a problem with distorting facts to fit your own personal idea of what the police are doing, and the personal idea that the Young Turks have is that the police are inherently institutionally racist and oppressive, and that is obviously not the case. So let's, a little aside, let's go on.
I wanted to just kind of start off with, I guess, disagreeing with the notion that the left is afraid to have these kinds of discussions or debates. In fact, you had tweeted that video that we started this conversation with, and there were a lot of responses from prominent individuals on the left. I want to give you a few examples, starting with Vosh, who's a big Twitch streamer. He's got a big YouTube channel as well. He says, "You couldn't be more wrong. I love spirited debate in the free marketplace of ideas. He even provided his email and would love to have that conversation with you. My good friend Ben Burgess also responded. He's a great guy. He says, hi Dennis, I'd be delighted to chat with you either on my show or you could host it through prageru, or I'm sure Modern Day Debate or some other neutral platform would be happy to host it. And on multiple occasions, I noticed that Sam Seder would also love to debate you. So he responded in that tweet as well, saying,
okay, so a few things here. Here's what Anna is doing. Prager was trying to make a broader point about how discourse on the left, comparatively, compared to the general American right, is chilled and confined due to certain things. This point is not only a wise point to make, it is the factual point to make. Just because you can point out individual instances of particular leftists, particularly people who have massive followings, and particularly people who have something to gain from debating you, just because they want to debate you does not mean that your political ideology writ large does not discourage debate. On the left, there is this idea of hate speech. And the idea of hate speech goes as follows. There are certain types of language that can be hurtful to certain people due to those people belonging to a protected class or a marginalized class. And because the people in that class are marginalized, the things that are hurtful towards them should not be allowed to be said because that basically triggers these emotions within them that hurt them, and therefore words are violence. On the other hand, the other coin is this. If you are silent in the face of the verbal abuse that people may face if they're in marginalized classes, your silence is also violence. This is why you will hear the term words are violence and silence is violence, because they are basically using emotions as a justification for a moral value. This is always a bad idea. So a few things on this. Number one, they're making a category mistake. Emotions do not justify moral values. Morality is deduced from the nature of reality. And to do that, you must have reason. And to have reason must necessarily be higher than emotion. So there's a category error being made with this phrase, silence is violence, and words can be violence as well. That's number one. Number two, you are presuming a certain status amongst a group of people because of how they look, which is not a logical presumption to make, which is another reason why this falls apart. But number three, the consequences of your presumption and the consequences of your worldview in this case is to restrict certain kinds of speech. This is why the theorist Mary Matsuda wrote in the early 1990s, her paper on assaultive speech, and she has been pushing to actually ban certain kinds of speech because in her paper she wrote that it hurts people that have been victims of physical racial violence. The left does not typically like debate because the left does not view debate in the same way that some people who are non-leftists, whether they be on the right or the center, do. They view debate as a means of potentially destroying and hurting people who are already, in their view, hurt and destroyed by the systems of society. Therefore, we must protect those people vis-a-vis laws and things of that sort. So no, Prager is making a very good point when he says the left does not like debate. On a epistemic level, this is generally true. Vosh and Burgess and Seder, first of all, Seder and Vosh is, what do I even say? Vosh called someone that I know a white supremacist and said he'll verify it later without actually offering any proof.
Not gonna lie, some days I wake up feeling dejected seeing progressives label mass amounts of people, including myself, as white supremacists or having white supremacist talking points, and then act confused when things are more tense and divided. Dude, this is my favorite bitch baby talking point from conservatives. I think it's so funny when they call me a racist and then they complain about social division. Like, okay. Very nice. I'll debate. I'll call you a white supremacist to your face. I don't even know enough about your positions. I'll just guess that you're a white supremacist, and then I'll substantiate it later. I'll post hoc justify my assessment of your character, and I'll be right, too. It's not hard to tell with you people.
Sam Seder has been known to play dirty tricks to humiliate his opponents, and he's been known to make circular and rather granular arguments that have no justification in reality. Not every opponent, my friends, is a good opponent. Not every opponent is a good opponent. The wise man will not chase every dog that barks. He will pick his battles. And so I think Prager was wise to pick his battles. Let's continue.
However, I will say there is a reason why the right wing tends to be more open to having these kinds of discussions and debates, and the left wing gets a little uneasy about it. And it's because there has been this prevalence of prominent figures who identify as the left, right, or on the left, who then later start to, cozy up to right-wing figures, and then it turns out that they completely move to the right wing because they're essentially paid to do it. They're used as tools by the right wing to essentially spew right-wing talking points while purporting to still be on the left. In fact, Dave Rubin's a great example of that. Dave Rubin used to work with us. He identified as someone on the left. Yeah, go ahead.
Forgive me, Anna. Dave Rubin made a video for PragerU, Why I Left the Left.
Oh, I know.
He does not, in fact, state to the world that he's still on the left. I don't know who you have in mind, so I can only address the one name that you gave. Dave Rubin acknowledges he's not on the left.
It's interesting because if I recall correctly, you had a conversation with Dave Rubin and how incredibly important it was that he was engaging in these discussions with you, discussions with the right wing, and you stated something very specific. I actually want to go to that video and I want to get your thoughts. Maybe you can elaborate on what you meant in this video.
Here's the important thing to note about the claims she's trying to make here. So she's basically poisoning the waters here. She's basically saying, well, the reason why the left is suspicious of debate, after she said, by the way, that the left likes to debate, so she contradicted herself. The reason why the left is suspicious of the debate is because sometimes through debate, people who were once on the left went over to the right. Now, if you actually sat down and thought about that statement for a few seconds, you'd actually realize that Anna is saying that when leftist ideas are confronted, people tend to change. That's her claim here. But what she's trying to say, while saying that, she's trying to say that people who debate and they're on the left figure out that it's more profitable to be on the right, therefore they go over to the right. So the reason why Anna is not skeptical of debate is because apparently it makes leftists take after right-wing money. This is the argument here. This is a comical argument because it's not an argument that has any basis in anything other than an ad hominem attack. Is it not possible that someone could be influenced by values, that could be influenced by a sea shift in the heart and not the money of a big foundation to go ahead and change their positions? It is not popular, nor is it profitable to change the position that you've held over a long period of time, that you've built an audience up over, because what happens is you have to start entirely from scratch. But for someone like Anna, who can't think outside of terms of money and systems and all these kind of narrow things, she will immediately attribute vice and bad character to people who depart from her ever so wise and enlightened worldview. This is nothing more than an emotional expression on her part, a emotional expression masquerading as an argument because it draws upon common tropes and themes that are prevalent within political discourse, i.e. calling people who you don't like a grifter. You may not like someone, but that is not sufficient grounds to call them a grifter. Let's keep going.
So I want to move on to other statements you've made, other issues. You do focus on culture war related issues, your distaste, hatred for secularism. I want to start off, without putting words in your mouth, to show a video of something you said just yesterday on the Dennis Prager show.
Notice, she has all of this prepared beforehand. If this was actually a honest debate, the conversation would be about principles. See, here's the problem, my friends. A lot of people get wrapped up in personalities and in opinions. And this is what has happened to me when I've gone on shows like Dr. Rashad Ritchie's. Ritchie had a sort of compilation of things that I had said, not to this degree because I'm nowhere near as prolific as Dennis Prager because I'm just 22 years old, I'm still very young. But he had a list of stuff I had said. And he was trying to use that against me. Because in this kind of environment, Anna does not benefit from a debate. Let's understand this. Vosh, Cedar, Anna Kasparian, Cenk, Uygur, Rishi, they don't benefit from actual debates. They benefit from glorified rhetorical jousting sessions that have the aesthetic of the debate, but the substance of a shouting match that goes nowhere but in the direction that the onlooking crowd happens to want it to go, and the onlooking crowd in this case happens to be leftists who already have demented opinions of people who do not believe the same things they do. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but in this kind of environment, it's pretty polarized, and the kind of person watching TYT, watching Vosh, watching Sam Seder is not the kind of person who is going to sit there and be open to all kinds of ideas. They watch these personalities for a reason, because these personalities do not give play to other ideas. They instead, and you'll see this a little bit in the Cenk debate, I believe, they instead pretend to give play to other ideas only to present a caricature of them and then tear them down with some emotional expression or whatever. But you see, let's not, if you're going to debate someone, it's important not to get tied up in opinions and personalities. Keep it on the issues. Keep the topic on the issues. This was a problem that I saw when I was in my collegiate debate team before I got kicked out by the team. Before I got silently kicked out, because I voluntarily left. But I left because everyone on that team wanted me to go. And the issue was everyone on the team rooted the debate in their identity as a queer person or as a black person or what have you. None of them actually debated on the merits of issues. And collegiate debate as a format actually promoted that kind of debate where people solely focused on them being a queer person or them being a Latino person or them being an oppressed person, as opposed to them simply being an individual who is trading words and trying to understand the nature of reality. The nature of reality was concealed behind systems and vague mythologies that these people had. And the Young Turks and Seder and Vosh and everyone who's in this space really are blinded by mythologies of the other side. And there are people on the right that are also blinded by mythologies of the other side as well, which is why it's important to keep the message on the principle and not the person. Let's go.
The computer sticker phenomenon is crazy. It was actually one of the biggest shocks I had.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
On your computer right here, people, instead of just having a blank back,
I see.
they would
have messages.
Yes. It would either
be...
be...
And what was the common message?
I heart women, or just the female sign, the circle and the arrow.
I heart women on a woman's computer?
Yes.
All of this is proof to me that women need men. These women are manless. They may have hookups, but they're manless. And they might have been fatherless too. Ending with my generation, I would say ending with the baby boomers, but certainly through then, a young woman thought a lot about, do I have a boyfriend? Mm-hmm. What will my wedding be like? What will I wear? Who will be there? Who will the guy be? That, I believe, is healthy and normal for a young woman. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing. That has been knocked out by the feminist left. And if you think about it, you're a weak female.
He's making a very salient point here. So Mr. Prager and I may differ on some of the finer details here, but the general point he's making is not entirely incorrect. Here's the deal with this. The first wave of feminists, Susan B. Anthony's, the people who wanted women's suffrage, they fought to have a privilege that men had, and that is essential to a functioning constitutional republic, i.e. the privilege of voting. They fought to have that on the grounds of universality, and that was a sound argument. But what happened in the second wave is that you had these feminist theorists, many of them inspired by postmodernism and anti-civilizational ideas, which seek to deconstruct and destroy the necessary principles of reality and erect systems and institutions and a broader view of the world, or at least a poor view of the world in the place of principles that would have at one time be considered common sense. They adopted that worldview, and then from that worldview came all kind of weird political mutations that ultimately ended up providing the framework for some pretty horrendous ideas. The idea, by the way, that came out of second wave feminism of the personal being political. So for those of you who do not know political theory, I'll explain a little bit here. In political theory, especially in Enlightenment political theory, there are two spheres of society. There is the private, and then there's the public sphere. The private sphere is the sphere of the family and of the individual. The public sphere is the sphere of the government. Now, I've explained in a past video why I think the public-private dichotomy is actually nonsense, and it doesn't actually exist. It only exists by fiat. That's a different topic for a different day. But the second wave of feminists take this idea of the public-private dichotomy, and they say, all right, the private is actually political. There is no separation. It's actually the same thing because the family, this is the argument they made, the family is an oppressive unit of society that hold women down. So what we have to actually do is allow women to become, or encourage women to become politically active and take back control over the reins of the family to democratize the family. So there won't be one person at the head. There will in fact be multiple people, multiple shareholders in the family. This was an idea that treated social units of organization like the family as inherently oppressive as opposed to cooperative, which is really their true nature when you think about it in principle. And through that idea, feminists began indoctrinating women to reject the family, reject structure, reject order, reject all that stuff, and embrace sexual liberation, embrace free love, embrace listlessness in the face of obligation. Forget obligation, don't have kids. These ideas came out of the postmodern nucleus of second wave feminism. And Prager would be right to say that's a concern. Now, I'm not sure if the stickers, I don't know about all that, but in general, that's absolutely correct. So let's see how they try to spin this.
So fascinating statements there. You seem to believe that women who love themselves, who love women, who feel confident about being women, tend to be manless and lonely. Do you genuinely think that?
This is a straw man argument. Prager never said women who love women or love themselves are manless and lonely. He said the act of putting a sticker on your laptop to virtue signal this desire of yours probably signifies a deep flaw within your character. That's not the same thing as saying you cannot love yourself or you can't love other people. Again, an absolute straw man in every way, shape, or form meant to attack Prager's character. This is a tactic that they keep on using. We'll only go through a few more of these before we go to the next clip.
Be manless and lonely. Do you genuinely think that? Do you think I'm manless and lonely? I think women rock.
I said that in general, women need men, and I've said 1,000 times that in general, men need women.
Yes.
The fact that that's controversial is a statement about what's happened to our culture.
But you got triggered by a story about women who have laptop stickers that just say positive things about women. Your mind immediately went to, they might have daddy issues and they're lonely, they need men. I want to understand your thinking. Like, okay, how do you get to that conclusion?
It's if you had a heterosexual man, with 97% of men are heterosexual, with a sticker, I love men, you would wonder why. Why don't men have stickers, I love men, but you think it's perfectly normal and a non-issue that women would have stickers, I love women? What is the point of saying that? It is worthy of a question. What? And I don't think
love is a universal affection. It's a universal expression that every human being has in their possession. And it doesn't make very much sense to categorize your love in such a manner to say, hey, I love men, or I love women, or I love X, Y, and Z, because you haven't met all men, you haven't met all women, and you would have to ask yourself, what is the common source of your love for them? Do you like men because of their physical appearance? Well, what about men who don't have the physical appearance you like? And then wouldn't it be more appropriate to say that you prefer a certain kind of physical appearance? Okay, now you've gone from a broader category to a subcategory. You see, when you make generalizations like this, you do make yourself seem a little bit foolish, especially if you do so as a means of establishing a judgment here. So I get the point here, and this point, regardless of what you think about it, has nothing to do with you liking yourself or not, anything like that. It's just a general statement that may not have a specific anchor or meaning to it. So I understand.
I mean, when you really think about it, women didn't have the right to vote for a very long time. Women didn't even have the ability to apply for a credit card until the 1970s. There have been equality issues when it comes to men and women. Now, we're getting a lot better, that's for sure. But first of all, I don't agree that women have laptop stickers that just simply say, I love women. It's probably some sort of empowering statement for women, but that doesn't mean that
this is all her, 14 minutes in, this is all her just attacking him. They're not debating any of the broader issues. This is all just a slander fest against him. Let's talk about this idea of empowerment for a second. I think the greatest myth sold to women by the second wave feminist crowd was that they should be empowered on the basis of their sex. There were people telling women in that era and in the eras before that, preceding eras, that they should be disempowered and they should be servile on the basis of their sex. Both claims are wrong. Both claims are statements that attach a value to something that neither party had anything to do with. Women had no control over being born into their sex. So why should they feel bad about that, and why should they feel good about that? But what women and men and every other person have control over, they have control over their wills, what they do in this world, their character, their persistence, their value systems. And they have the ability not to endorse foolish statements like, I want to be an empowered man, or I want to be an empowered woman. Why not be an empowered individual, empowered by the fact that you exist against a backdrop of natural law, against a backdrop of objective reality and objective principles, and then use that to make whatever impact you want to make on the world, regardless of what people say about you? Why not let that be empowering? The fact that in an era where there was very little technology available, there was a man who circumnavigated almost the entire globe, Magellan, and he did something that no other man at that point in time had actually done. How about the fact that there were people that explored the very reaches of this earth in an era where navigation charts were still primitive, and yet they got close to Antarctica? How about the fact that there are just so many things that have happened out of not even pure coincidences, but out of people cultivating excellence and applying the fruits of their excellence towards a particular end, and that created more value for the rest of society and the rest of the world, and that increased humanity's understanding of the nature of this world? Why not be empowered by that? None of that has anything to do with sex. Nothing to do with it whatsoever. So this empowering women stuff or empowering men stuff, it's all a feeble attempt to get at the true issue, which is that we should all be empowered by our common humanity. That's the real story. All right, we're almost done with this clip here. Let's keep going.
To do. And so while the right wing and you yourself seem to have this idea that, well, you know, women should focus on marriage, they should focus on building a family. First of all, you can't force anyone to do that, right? But let's say you want to encourage women to focus on that. You want to give them the choice, but you want to encourage them. A great way to encourage them is to create an economic system in which people feel comfortable knowing that they can survive on a single income household. I'm talking about when they're married, okay? Both individuals in a marriage have to work in order to be able to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, put food on the table for their children, educate their children. Wages have remained stagnant since the 1970s. Women don't have a choice as to whether or not they can work or whether or not they should just focus on raising children. They don't have the choice. That's the point I'm trying to make.
This is just not true. Wages have not remained stagnant since the 1970s. Since the 1970s, there have been new industries that have been invented and have been put into society. And in those industries, there are different levels of work, there are different levels of participation from the sexes. And so what Anna is doing here is Anna is using a very older model to make a point about a world in which that model may not even be applicable. That's a different story here. But also, the argument here that you have to make sure people can survive on a single income, how in the world do you do that in a dynamic world? See, this is the problem with progressivism. Progressivism assumes a linear and almost unchanging world, or it has to make any sense, because it wants to use government programs to enforce a set and standard of living and value upon people. It wants to use government programs to, for example, provide for welfare without actually considering how would welfare programs be effective in an economy in which inflation exists. How can welfare programs be effective in a governmental system in which cuts are made all the time? How can welfare be effective in the context of humanity if there are people who don't seek to use their minds for anything other than living in squalor and having unproductive lives? What would happen if a majority of society actually adopted welfare and didn't do anything else but live off the dole? Progressivism does not assume any of these things because it has the broader goal in mind. If we just give people welfare, we'll help them without actually considering the dynamics and relationships that surround how someone receives and uses welfare. So how in the world, Anna, would you ensure that someone can survive off of a single income in a world that is constantly changing, constantly developing, constantly revitalizing, and in a world in which human action is so dynamic and the will is free? How do you ensure this stuff? You don't. You can't. The fact is, humanity is too much of a complex entity to be captured by 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 any kind of standard government policy. Remember, government policies are entirely based on coercion. They are not based on actually keeping up with individuals, keeping up with the economy. They are based on an action, coercion, that stops things. Coercion, which is delivered by force, stops things. Force does not create, force stops. Force is a stopping mechanism. And if you expropriate money from one group of people to give it to another group of people so they can have a better standard of living or they can live off a single income, what you're actually doing is reducing the productive prowess of that economy. This is why when you raise taxes to a very high level, people begin to flee. This is why people are fleeing California for Texas and for Florida, because Florida has no income tax and Texas has much lower taxes. Because when you keep expropriating, people's ability to be productive human beings and to contribute to society actually go down. This is the chief flaw of all progressive policy proposals. Humanity and social structures are too dynamic and too complex to be addressed by government policies that rely on defying those relationships in the pursuit of a broader goal.
Right, and we differ on that because the reason that many women, not all, but perhaps most even, are working is not just economic, especially certainly in the upper class, upper middle class, and even part of the middle class. It is because they believe that their self-worth derives more from work than it does from family. If a girl got up in a high school or college class, let's say a professor or a teacher said, so women, I mean, to the extent that they can now say that, because you can't say boys and girls in many elementary schools,
correct,
because we're told by your side that sex is not binary. But let's say they say, we'd like the women in this class, please stand up and tell us what your vision for your life is. If a girl got up in a college class and said, you know, to be honest, my greatest hope in life is for a good marriage and to make a family, she would be regarded as almost a freak.
Would she?
I mean,
what is that based on? What evidence do you have?
It absolutely would be. And it's based on paying attention to the cultural landscape. It's based on understanding the dynamics and the application of ideas that came out of second wave feminism, which promote a lot of this kind of stuff. It's based on all of that. Now, let me just make my own views very clear here, my friends. I believe that the family is a cooperative enterprise. I believe the family is a voluntary enterprise. I do not exalt the family over the individual. I do not think the individual is bound to the family. That this goes for both men and women. And so that's my views on the family. But I do believe that the family unit is a very powerful engine of growth and success and protection in a society, because the family unit combines the energies and efforts of a group of people together. And whenever you have a lot of different hands put together, there's more potential for something to happen. So the family plays a very practical and important role in the formation of society. But without the individual throwing themselves into the family and pushing the family towards certain directions, the family will be nothing more than an unproductive engine, a car that doesn't work, so to speak. It's always important to keep that in mind. So Anna is acting willfully ignorant here of the dynamics of these ideologies, of all these ideas, especially within feminism, that say the family is a patriarchal unit of society, and therefore we gotta democratize the family by using politics, by using government to do so. That is literally the doctrine of so many second-wave feminist ideas, and Anna is here acting saying, well, what's the proof for this? These ideas did not come from anywhere. Almost every major university has a gender studies department in which they also teach these kind of ideas. This is very stuff that can be found quite easily, but it's in Anna's best interest to be ignorant.
Following the Buffalo supermarket shooting, which of course was inspired by a belief in a conspiracy theory that whites are being replaced with minorities in this country purposely to keep Democrats in power, you felt the need to kind of downplay right-wing extremism in this country. For instance, the Southern Poverty Law Center did a poll and found that 7 out of 10 Republican voters believe in that white replacement conspiracy theory. Are you concerned about that at all?
First of all, the Southern Poverty Law Center is an absolute sham of an organization. They were good in the 1970s when they were suing families who were, well, they were suing the Ku Klux Klan, who was harassing families and going to their houses and threatening them with violence. They were good then, but they have morphed into an organization that is possessed by leftist ideology and who has labeled people who don't like the government very much as anti-government extremists. Like, for example, Cliven Bundy, the rancher who the government was trying to encroach upon his land. The SPLC slandered his good name simply because Bundy had wanted to claim dominion over his property. He wanted to use his property in the way that he wanted to use his property, which was not harmful to anyone else. And the SPLC has a long history of doing this kind of stuff. Also, the white replacement theory, I made a video about this as well, which I'll link in the comment section down below, in the description down below. The white replacement theory, or the great replacement theory, is not actually what we've been seeing in political discourse and mainstream political discourse. We have been seeing, and I believe Prager will bring this up in a second, what we have been seeing is a reaction to the importation of certain people from different kinds of countries into the country who tend to vote a certain way. This is a strategy now that not only have Democrats openly approved of this in books that have been written in the past a few decades or so, but this is also a strategy that political strategists actually endorse in some way, shape, and form. Now, having said this, I believe that it is up to people on the right to make the argument to people who may come over here from different countries as to why their ideas are superior. I do not believe that it is a sufficient justification to reject immigration because it may change political demographics. Convince people, don't keep them out because you don't like their views. And we have seen in many cases, in the cases of Cubans, in the cases of many Hispanics, that there are groups that come from different countries that actually do align with the general values of the American experiment. One more word on this great replacement stuff. The Great Replacement theory, as visualized by white supremacists, has to do with demographics changing and whites becoming a minority. The Great Replacement, as visualized in mainstream political conversation, has nothing to do with the browning of America or whatever. It has everything to do with how certain demographics can be weaponized to change the results of political elections. It has nothing to do with race and everything to do with values. But I mentioned before that it's not enough to say, well, those people may vote this way, therefore keep them out. There are plenty of ways that through a reformed immigration system that could be accounted for in the American experiment preserved. So we're gonna, rest of this video, you can watch it yourself. Let's go ahead and let's look at the Cenk versus Dennis Prager video on Palestine and Israel. And there are other clips as well that they did, but to keep this video short, I'm not going to go ahead over those other clips. Let's go over the Cenk versus Prager video on Israel and Palestine. All right, everybody, now we're going to be doing the Cenk versus Prager debate on Israel and Palestine. Again, there's a floor debate here that they had in their members-only segment, I believe, but we will not be going over the entire thing. I want to keep this video as compact as possible, so let's see what the debate over Israel and Palestine was here. The fact that Cenk is in it, I think, will definitely make this a little bit insufferable, but we'll see how far we can go. Let's go.
In Florida, if you don't agree with the far right-wing government of Israel, they will actually take contracts away from you. They will hurt your livelihood. That is the government regulating speech. I assume you've spoken out against that and you've been vituperative about it, right?
To the extent that a person advocates BDS, which is the economic destruction of Israel, and should be allowed to advocate it, I think they should be allowed to advocate it. That's right.
So
okay.
Florida,
by the way.
Okay, so point to be made here. So government contracts. This is the odd thing, because government contracts have a set of terms to them that everyone has to follow. And government contracts are also inherently political, because the government is, of course, is a political body, and government contracts are sometimes given out on the basis of common political agreement. So you have to understand that if you have a conservative government in a certain area, a government contract may indeed be subject to that conservative government. If you have a more progressive government, same thing. For a practical example of this is when Biden refused to give oil and gas leases to drilling companies, and when he rescinded Keystone XL. That is a progressive government actually taking actions to manipulate the terms or destroy the terms of a contract because it goes against their ideology. So what Cenk is pointing out here is not necessarily an assault on free speech as much as it is the nature of government contracts. If Cenk has a problem with the nature of government contracts, I would urge Cenk Uygur to actually encourage the government to do less contracting and leave broad entire areas of society for private enterprise to handle. In that way, perhaps there will be a chance that someone with Cenk's disposition against Israel would be able to succeed. Let's go.
Government. Why are you calling it far right?
Yeah, you think that Naftali Bennett got any better, or the current person that's in charge? They're all right wingers. None of them want Palestinians to be free. They think Palestinians aren't really fully human and can't be trusted to run their own government. They deny them a state. And so, but let's get back to America. January 6th.
No. You can't throw out bombshells and then.
Prager's right. You can't do that kind of stuff in a debate. But we've seen Anna do this several times. Now we're seeing Cenk do this. This is how these operators, these slick operators, the Young Turks operate. They throw out all these crazy claims that they don't want subject to philosophical inspection, and they expect those claims to do well with their audience and then to be chucked up as a win, but then to continue on with the rest of their tirade. The truth is the Israel and Palestine situation is incredibly complex, and I myself support a two-state solution. I believe that's the best practical vessel for peace. But one thing is also sure. The Palestinians are under the tutelage of Hamas, and Hamas is an organization which has vowed several times to destroy Israel. So then you have the internal threat from Hamas, then you have the external threat from people like the Ayatollah in Iran, who has said several times that he would raise Tel Aviv to the ground, and then you have Israel's troubled history on part of that, such as the wars that happened when almost the entire Middle East tried to come up together and destroy Israel right after its founding. There are so many adversaries that this nation has had, and it is logical for a nation to be concerned about its own self-preservation. So it makes sense as to why there is political difficulty with giving Palestinians their own state, because that would possibly lead to the destruction of Israel. And given its history, given its past, and given the current political dynamics of the Middle East, all of this shouldn't be complicated for anyone to understand.
That the Israeli government, or the average Israeli who voted for this government, thinks that Palestinians are not fully human?
Absolutely. Then why don't you let them go? Why can't they have their own state?
Because it'll be run by Hamas. Are you foolish?
Okay, so what?
Exactly. Okay, hold on. So Cenk does not qualify his statement that the Israeli government believes Palestinians are not fully human. All he says is, okay, if you don't believe that, then why don't you give them their own state? So what he is doing here, he's making a blanket assumption about the intentions of the Israeli government completely and utterly ignoring historical dynamics, completely and utterly ignoring the political feuds between the Israeli government and Hamas, completely and utterly ignoring Hamas's activities in Israel, which include blowing up places in mainland Israel, completely and utterly ignoring all of these things and just saying that if you don't give these people a government, you don't think of them as human. Last time I checked, people were not geographies. Governments and countries are kind of geographies and institutions in geographies. And the fact that Cenk is willing to reduce Palestinians to geographies and institutions shows to me that he has a lower view of them than anyone in the Israeli government could possibly have. There are tense cultural fights happening in that region, and for Cenk to completely ignore all of that and just proceed with the idea that it's because the Israeli government hates the humanity of the Palestinians, well, that shows me that Cenk is a pretty shallow thinker, but that's nothing that we didn't know before. But this kind of argumentation is very popular in the media landscape. He didn't even qualify his opinions. He didn't even justify his opinions. He made a complete and utter non sequitur. A argument does not follow from the premise. It does not follow that a statement of someone's humanity is made if you don't let them set up a government. That is a category mistake. It makes no sense whatsoever. But this kind of wizardry is applauded in the media landscape, and it's concerning. We need to be careful, my friends. We need to be careful because people like this can really mislead you.
State. So since you are preventing them, doesn't that make you a monster who doesn't believe in freedom, and that all of your empty talk about how much you love freedom is total garbage because you don't think it applies to Palestinians?
You have a weird way of thinking.
Great answer.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Why
It is
can't
a
the
great
Palestinians
answer.
have the same
Why is
freedom
it
that
weird?
every other human being
Okay,
has?
if you allow me to speak, I'll tell you why it's weird. You believe there is a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas. That is morally sick.
You are sick for not allowing Palestinians, millions of them, to be free. You don't believe in freedom, Dennis. You believe
Argument from emotion. Whoa. Okay. Occupation. The Palestinians are not humans. They're being held captive. All those things are emotional trigger words. All those things are emotional trigger words meant to make the viewer angry. None of the things that Cenk listed just then have anything to do with the historical, cultural, or philosophical dynamics of what is actually happening on the ground between Israel and Palestine. And again, this is an example of him using rhetoric as a tool to cut up his opponents as opposed to being a magnifying glass to find the missing clues, the missing links in the situation. Again, this is just another example of how bad Cenk is at this kind of thing. And you see, he's foaming at the mouth almost. He's screaming. He's getting sweaty because he is doing everything he can to attack Prager on the level of character as opposed to on the level of actually arguing against Prager's positions. Again, this is the equivalent to throwing a bunch of bombs that go all over the place and not actually hitting the target, but just hitting around the target. This is what he's doing right now. He's a bomb thrower.
You believe in oppression as long as it's on your side. Why can't they be free? Why can't Palestinians be free? Because they will choose a government you don't agree with? That is the definition of oppression.
Okay, there you go.
He's constantly framing the debate as Palestinians being imprisoned as opposed to Israel having to fight for its existence against a terrorist organization that the Palestinians, by and large, support. You cannot get any more dishonest and intellectually fraught than this. Regardless of what you think about the Israel-Palestine situation, any observer would have to admit that there's a lot of terrorism coming from one side. And there is a nation that has been forced to defend itself ever since it was conceived politically in the 1940s. And for many, 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 many years, the people of that nation, the Jewish people, have been forced to defend themselves against all kinds of crusades and attacks throughout centuries, going all the way back to the siege of the 1100s. I mean, all of this stuff is factually relevant stuff when it comes to weighing these kind of situations. But Cenk is not interested in any of it. So, freedom exists in the context of the basic components of our humanity. And Prager has said several times that he is a classical liberal, which means that he believes that freedom is a value which animates human existence. So one can love freedom, and by loving freedom also want to preserve oneself. In fact, if you want freedom to mean anything, it has to be, at the very beginning, a means of preserving one's life. Otherwise, you have no life by which to exercise freedom. So that's one thing. So you can love freedom and hate terrorism. In fact, that's actually, that follows if you look at logical conclusion. Number two, Cenk continues to phrase this as a matter of oppressor versus oppressed, as opposed to a matter of two conflicting camps that have been fighting for decades, continuing to fight each other, and people who may have had nothing to do with that fight getting wrapped up in between it. This is what happens in war. Civilian populations tend to get wrapped up in between two conflicting parties, and that's what happens. By proximity, there's damage done, and it's an unfortunate reality of war. It's something that, it's one of the reasons why I think war is ultimately a unproductive use of human energy and activity, and I think that that's one of the reasons why we should avoid war at all costs. But when it comes to self-preservation, war is probably sometimes the most viable means of ensuring that actually happens. So not only is Cenk not phrasing this in the right way, not only does Cenk himself not understand what freedom actually means, but Cenk continues to show the limits of his intellectual capabilities when it comes to dealing with morally, historically, and practically complex matters. And that's why this video will be a little bit shorter, because this is grinding my gear.
Would they be different than all other human beings? Why would they be
different from all other human beings? Iran has that.
But you said that they cannot govern themselves and they will elect vicious terrorists.
That's right. Unfortunately, because the worst of them are dominant, just like in Iran.
Just like Netanyahu and all the thousands that he murdered. Okay.
Okay. What? He murdered?
Yeah. You do a war and you have a kill ratio of 1,000, sometimes 100 to 1, sometimes even more. And that kills thousands of Palestinians and go, oh golly gee, did I kill all of them? It was an accident. When the terrorist Arabs who can't govern themselves, who are vicious terrorists, they do it, that is terrorism. When the state of Israel does it, it is not terrorism. And we killed 100 times more, but it is not terrorism. We bomb in the middle of a crowded city and murder their civilians, but that is not terrorism because the state does it and people Dennis Prager likes does it, but the Arabs and the Palestinians are vicious terrorists by nature and can never govern themselves. Boy, advocate for freedom, Dennis, you're doing great.
Okay, so Dennis eventually makes this point, which is very important, that morality is not based in a kill ratio. So just because a lot of people happen to die from a certain action, does not necessarily mean the action itself was immoral. This is correct. I would go a little bit further than this as well. I would say the obsession with numbers that a lot of people have, this is more of a universal problem in political discourse, is an obsession which almost always goes down a path of ignorance and wrong conclusions. Numbers, whether they be in the empirical format, whether they be in whatever format, are merely a tool, a medium for further understanding. It's why when someone says, well, the stats say X, Y, and Z, therefore X, Y, and Z is true, they are committing intellectual laziness because stats may say something, but you have to investigate. Why does a certain statistic say something? What is the use of that stat in the context of a moral discussion? Statistics do not convey morals. Statistics are mere measurements, and morals are not merely measurements. Morals are also statements of principles that are necessary for the preservation and existence of life, that life necessitates, as you understand morals in the natural law context. So naturally, when one views statistics as a matter of morals or a matter of correctness, moral correctness rather, one is committing scientism. One is committing the fallacy of believing that the scientific method, which can gather data and interpret data, it can also be used to tell us what is right and what is wrong. You don't need to have a degree in statistics to understand what is right and what is wrong. You have to have a good sense of common sense, reinforced through reason, with some things pointed out to you in philosophical education. Cenk has none of these things, so I would not expect him to get this.
Does it, but the Arabs and the Palestinians are vicious terrorists by nature and can never govern themselves. Boy, advocate for freedom, Dennis, you're doing great.
Somebody should add up the amount of time I got to speak and you got to speak on this segment here. Your notion that kill ratio determines morality is really pathetic. Mm-hmm. We killed far more Germans than Germans killed Brits or Americans. Correct. Does that make America wrong in World War II? If kill ratio is your criterion.
Correct. Dennis is completely and utterly correct in this one. He's absolutely correct. Kill ratio does not decide morality.
No, Dennis, it depends on disproportionate power.
was
You know
the
who had disproportionate power? The Germans over the Jews. They had disproportionate power, and the state did it. The state of Germany did that to the Jewish population, to the Polish population, to all of those different people. But you would say, no, when the state does it, it's no big deal.
Okay, disproportionate power. This is a very interesting point. So, if the power between two parties that are fighting is disproportionate, does that mean that one party is therefore morally obligated not to defend itself? That seems to be the implication here, and that's quite odd. And during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, when the Barbary pirates were destroying American vessels off the coast of Tripoli, America was obviously much more organized and much more bigger, even though it was a young nation at that point, than a bunch of ragtag pirates that had decided to go ahead out for a looting session that day. Yet, Jefferson took the correct action. He bombarded their ports, and he defended American ships and defended American workers who were out there delivering shipments. There was disproportionate power, yet the action of defending a country's own vessels and its own citizens is a demonstrably moral action because it coincides with the idea, with the principle of self-preservation. So disproportionate power is not what makes a action moral or immoral. What makes an action undertaken by a state actor or undertaken by an individual or a set of individuals moral or immoral is what end the action is directed to, number one, and what means are used to carry out that action. So if an action is directed towards the end of enslaving people, the means actually don't even matter. The end itself is immoral. But if an action is directed to helping people, let's say help people get a house, but the means are, let's go ahead and steal people's property so we can get people a house, the action is still immoral because the means are morally compromised. That is the true definition and location of morality. In the actions themselves and in the methods taken to carry out the action, not in the proportion of power or the numbers that undertake the action themselves.
Israel defends itself. End of issue.
That's literally what the Germans said. We must defend the homeland.
Okay, so you are comparing the Germans and Israel.
I'm comparing state power to state power. You're saying no, individuals are terrorists.
No, this comparison doesn't work, Cenk, because not all state power is used in the same towards the same end, nor is all state power used with the same means. If you don't understand the relationship between means and ends, and then on top of that, if you don't understand the relationship between means, ends, and the moral qualities of actions in themselves, what you get is a lack of moral understanding, a lack of political understanding, and a whole boatload of ignorance that is present throughout your analysis, which is quite obvious in this clip right here. So no, you cannot compare state power to state power if the state power is being used in a disanalogous context upon which it is being used in this debate. All right, we're done with this debate. Both of them, you guys can go and watch the rest of the debates on your own time. A few words before I go here. So, number one, Dennis Prager is doing what I think more conservative personalities should do, and that is he is willing to go into the lion's den and demonstrate with a calm, sage-like, sagacious rationality how to handle claims that really have no basis in rational argumentation. Everyone should do that because human beings learn by reference points. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what that means, there are things in the world that we look at that can teach us some things. We are more vulnerable to these things when we are kids, which is why it's important, vitally important, to protect a child's innocence, which is why children have to be protected from the indoctrination efforts currently going on. But reference points can still influence us as we go through life. Many of us, if we see a grotesque event happen in front of us, like a dismemberment or something like that, or someone getting involved in a grotesque car accident, we will say, that looks terrible, because that's a reference point that triggers a certain emotion within us, regardless of our relationship with that person or whatever. Our common humanity is a very good mechanism for enabling us to react to certain things in the way that we do. Therefore, people who are listening to political conversation are constantly bombarded by reference points, both rhetorically and otherwise, and therefore it's important to give them a diversity of reference points, or else they won't have anything else to draw on. So this is a very important practice here. Number two, Mr. Prager was more patient than a lot of people would have been dealing with this kind of assault, this kind of verbal assault. And there are also ways, my friends, to handle this kind of verbal assault in a way that actually makes it seem silly. I think Dennis did a great job of that here. I'll add a few more tips. Number one, do not be afraid, as Dennis did, to call out the absurdity of your opponent's claims. If your opponent is saying that you're evil and they're using a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, and they're not reasoning, do not be afraid to say you're acting like a passionate, emotionally possessed person right now. You're not being rational. What that does, it moves the debate on a level of character, but it's also a statement of fact. That statement of fact rests in the back of the mind of your audience, and it gives them a reference point to be able to distinguish your context, or your content rather, from the content of the person you're debating. Reference points are always helpful to help the audience make an informed decision. And one last thing before we go that I would always say it's important to do when dealing with debates like this. The facts are simply secondary for some of the people engaged in political debates. If you're dealing with Vosh, if you're dealing with Sam Cedar, if you're dealing with any of these gotcha operators, and I've debated them before, I've dealt with them, well, not Sam Cedar or Vosh, but I've debated people like that. If you're dealing with any of them, facts are secondary. These people are entertainers. The Young Turks are entertainers. They exist to entertain a crowd that keeps throwing them peanuts and giving them sustenance with those peanuts, keeps throwing them money. So when you understand that, you will be able to also approach the debate in a way that will hopefully be protected not only for you, but also for the people that you go back to in your audience or who may hold and share your values. My friends, don't let narrative agents intimidate you. Don't let narrative agents bring you down. The truth shines brighter than any amount of darkness, even the darkest of darkness. So my friends, I hope you guys enjoyed this reaction. I hope you guys also enjoyed some of the advice I've given here. If you guys like to support this channel, be sure to like this channel, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive, my friends. Bye-bye now.